their land will yield its harvest. Righteousness goes before him and prepares the way for his steps. And our gospel reading today comes from Matthew 14, verses 22 to 33. Immediately, he made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side, while he sent the crowds away. After he sent the crowds away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray, and when it was evening, he was there alone. But the boat was already a long distance from the land, battered by the waves, for the wind was contrary. And in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost!" And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter said to him, "Lord, if it's you, command me to come to you on the water." And he said, "Come." And Peter got out of the boat and walked on water and came towards Jesus. But seeing the wind, he became frightened and beginning to sink. He cried out, "Lord, save me!" Immediately, Jesus stretched out his hand and took hold of him and said to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind stopped, and those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "You are certainly God's Son." You know, as I was preparing this sermon, all the commentaries say that what this thing about is when your eyes are on Jesus, you can do anything. When you take your eyes off Jesus, you sink. That's not all that's in here. And so I wondered, as I started to ponder, I started to say, well, are we telling stories or history when we talk about our Christian faith? Once upon a time is how we start all of our children's stories. We start them like that, and the stories are meant to do a lot of things, just time together, teach lessons, help develop imagination according to the psychologists, and offer happy endings. But we have to ask ourselves when we tell these stories, do we believe? Is this history or simply a bedtime story? Do we believe Peter walked on the water? So today we're going to tell the once upon a time story of Matthew 14. And I'm going to start with the preamble. Once upon a time, a man who was also a God came to earth to make things better. He had power and could heal the sick and drive out demons and multiply food. He could raise the dead. He gathered around him sidekicks to help him save the earth. He shared with them his own power, yet they don't always use it. And this is their story. So in chapter 1, I'm making up Leslie chapters, what we see is the story. After feeding 5,000 plus women and children, Jesus made his sidekicks get into a boat and go to the other side of the sea. Well, he sent the crowds away. Afterwards, Jesus went up on the mountain to pray, and when it was evening, he was there alone. This is the beginning of Matthew. This is the story, but this is also the history. So why did Jesus send his sidekicks and the crowd away? Every time we read this passage, it's about walking on water. There's so much more. Think about what he had just done. 5,000 people plus their spouses plus their children. That was a lot of people to feed. That's what he had just done, so that's why he sent them away. Do you think he needed time to recharge and rest? Does anybody know what that's like? No. He took the time to recharge and rest and to go pray. What was he doing there? Dialogue with his Father. Do we take that time to dialogue with our Father? Maybe, maybe not. And we like to think that maybe it's just possible that Jesus valued getting these tasks accomplished as much as he valued spending time with his Father. It wasn't all tasks, and it wasn't all prayer. It was both. and he took the time and prioritized the time to do this, and he did a great job, and we have to believe that possibly, just possibly, that God may have affirmed and said, hey, you did a good job. Because I don't care who you are. Sometimes we like to be told we did a good job. And while God is truly greater, and we can't know, we are made in his image, and a pat on the back that's sincere, every once in a while is appreciated. So we have to think that Jesus had a reason. He wasn't just being capricious. So in Leslie chapter 2, but the boat was already a long distance from the land, being battered about by the waves, for the wind was blowing a gale. I've been out in that weather. Small craft advisories, 22-foot boat. I know what they were feeling. My fishermen here, do you not remember that feeling like, oh my gosh, what was I thinking? Why am I out here? I hope I can get home alive. What happens if it capsizes? And they were in a lot deeper water than we are. They were afraid, but they were also planning. Their brains were going 90 to nothing. And in that adrenaline high, while their brains were working on how to survive, there was also that fear that they couldn't look at that says, maybe we won't survive. So think about what the disciples were doing. They were being busy and they were being afraid. And do you think for the few of them that maybe had nothing, no task on that boat to do, that maybe they were thinking, this is the consequence of following this carpenter? I'm going to die in the middle of this raging ocean, and all for what? Did they maybe start to doubt Jesus? Doubt their own role in his mission? Did they doubt why they were there, and maybe they even doubted the wisdom of Jesus for sending them out? Did he not get that Noah advisory that there was a small craft advisory? He should have. That might have been what they were thinking. We don't know. But we know in Leslie chapter 3, and late in the night, Jesus came moseying up to the disciples, and he was walking on the angry sea. When his sidekicks saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, it's a ghost! And they cried out in fear. Now, when I take and put this in a different version, moseying is the accurate translation of the Greek. They said it a little nicer, but it was mosey. Now, you have to understand that they were afraid, and you look at them and say, of course there's no such thing as ghosts. We know there's not. I'm not so sure there's no such thing as ghosts. I'm here to tell you, number one. And number two, this was a different time. They had Greek gods. Poseidon could go around and he could take his chariots over the water. They were sort of culturally triggered to consider that critters could be, people, beings could be on top of the water, always with a chariot or something else. But they didn't go to think, oh, it's Poseidon. They saw him, they recognized his, and they didn't believe he could do what he was doing, because he's moseying up. The Greek word, if you translate it, is mosey. He wasn't running. He was sauntering. He was moseying up on this raging sea that was making them go like this. That's why they believed it was a ghost. They knew what it wasn't. And it looked kind of like Jesus, but they thought, this is impossible. It has to be a ghost because what he's doing is humanly impossible. Humanly impossible. So they decided it was a ghost. And rightly they were afraid, because in the history of ghosts, some ghosts will eat you or destroy you or invade you. They have a lot of nasty habits if you look at the history of ghosts and how people perceive ghosts. So think about it. They had a right to their fear. We from the 21st century said, I wouldn't be afraid. I know it's not a ghost. You would. I would. So also, it was a fair question that he would have been killed. He had, depending on estimates, 30 to 50,000 people were in that crowd. Remember, 5,000 men, but all their families. He had a lot of people there. Do you think he maybe stopped healing when somebody's back here? It's like, I have psoriasis and I want this healed now? What would we do if we found a miracle worker who could heal us? Is it possible we mobbed them because we wanted our ail healed now? It was very legitimate concern for them to consider that Jesus was more likely dead than that he was alive and walking on the water. Also, if you remember those Pharisees and Sadducees you hear a little bit about, and the Romans, they weren't terribly fond of Jesus. It was a legitimate concern to think that rather than him corporally walking on a body of water, that he was dead. It was a reasonable assumption for them to make. And that's the thing, we always say, oh, I wouldn't have made that assumption. Yeah, you would have. I think we would have. They had a fear, and that they cried out in fear. And one of that fear might have been, again, is Jesus is dead. What about the jobs we had, the mission? Are we ourselves the next to die? But then comes the next part, the fun part. And it says, but immediately Jesus spoke to them saying, take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid. And Peter said to him, Lord, if it's you, command me to come to you on the water. And Jesus said, come. And Peter got out of the boat and walked on water and came to Jesus. There is so much stuff going on. Who here has ever responded when your gut is knotted with fear? It's easier just to respond by being belligerent. I think that might have been a little what Peter was doing. This is a ghost. I'm not putting up with a ghost. I'm tired. I'm wet. I'm hungry. I smell like fish. This is not a good day for Peter or any of the other disciples. But the words he used in Greek meant he commanded, if it's you, Lord, command me to come out there. This was him with his, well, guys, don't do it. What do you guys do when you don't have your hands on your hips? All right, okay, great. But this was what I think he was doing. He, didn't believe it was Jesus, and only Jesus could get him out of that boat to walk. And when Jesus said, come, John did it. John got out of the boat and walked on water. Everybody talks about Jesus is walking on water, which is fabulous, but he's a God too. We're not as surprised. Peter would have drank with us. Tea, pop, beer, whatever, I don't care. Peter was our people. He would have fit in here. And somebody like us, Peter, was able to walk on water. Never forget that part of the story. Through Christ, through Jesus, he had enough powers offered to him from hanging out and being a sidekick of Jesus that he was able to walk himself on a raging sea. Now, he did what I think many of the rest of us would have done in that occasion. His brain, at a certain point, that faith is so strong. I'm challenging you. I'm working in the moment. He steps out there. He's walking. He's doing it. And then you think his brain's kicked in and maybe a little of the devil and said, but you're only human. Humans can't do this. And that may be true. Humans can't do it. But guess what? Christians can. There's not one person in this church who cannot, under the right circumstances, walk on water. We are sidekicks of Jesus, are we not? Now, there was this gentleman, as I was reading through all these commentaries to kind of find out what the real experts thought about. His name is Carlos Oliveras. And you know what? I was reading through his commentary, all scholarly, and he said he was comparing this time to when the apostles fell asleep in the boat and got up and, he's like, well, this time, only Peter was afraid. I'm not sure I agree with that commentary. The other guys were afraid to even get out the boat and try. They were just still squealing in fear. Peter, for all that he had fear, he also had some kind of chutzpah. He had faith. And he got out in the boat and walked. And so I don't know that that commentary is fair, because Peter was demonstrating the exact same power that Jesus our Lord had. And so our next chapter of the imaginary book, or is it real? Is it history? But Peter, seeing the wind, became frightened and beginning to sink. He cried out, Lord, save me! Immediately time he doubted. He was walking on water. His brain started to twist and think, oh my gosh, what am I doing? This is deep. The wave's coming down here. He might have like one leg up on a foot on the way there and one over there and suddenly really realized what he was doing. This is not glassy, smooth, calm. He was terrified. He went from covering up a little bit of fear with belligerence and then, oh my gosh, he could do it in the name of Jesus. He could walk on water. And then all of a sudden that brain. Have we ever outthought ourselves of a blessing or a power? I think that there's everybody in this church has. I am your leader in that. I think I've outthought myself of many, many gifts. And I can't help but think that I am not so unique that I am alone. So I think Peter's mind engaged and told him this is not possible, and he began to sink. And yes, it does say when he took his eyes off Jesus, he started sinking, but he also forgot who he was. He was Jesus' sidekick. He was gifted with power. Did Robin have his own set of powers? Yes. He had them. They weren't as good as Batman's, but he had them. Jesus shares equally with his toys. Peter had that power. But he forgot as he's walking on there, he became fully human and fully I am Peter, and this is not possible. He forgot that he was a child of Christ. So, our next chapter, when they got into the boat, the wind stopped, and those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "You are certainly God's son." Now these guys, have you ever looked at the apostles and said, oh my gosh, I recognize them, I too am that blind sometimes, and I was being really nice to all of us. They had just seen him duplicate the food. That was what they left, remember? Before he was told to get in the boat, they had duplicated food for 5,000 men. So they knew he was capable of this. And I have to say, is when I read this, I'm more impressed in some ways by the fact that he stopped the wind. Because we all work with wind, right? And I'm out in boats and wind. Guess what? Wind is a global factor. It's not local. Well, a little wind is local, but we're not going there. So anyway, wind is this global factor. It comes from the heat of the oceans, the rotation of Earth. It's all one continuous thing, the size of a planet, and he stopped it. He stopped some event that was planet-sized. Is that not two great miracles for you? We don't really realize how big a miracle it is to stop the wind, but maybe the apostles did. He suddenly made everything calm for them. And they worshipped him, saying, "You are certainly God's son." Now we know that they forget about this a little bit further on, like all of us I think do. But I want to think about this. They worshipped him, and I wondered, we are called to worship God, but can worship alone without friendship be a little weighty on God? Worship, if I'm just worshiping you like you're, Jerome Bettis, no. So anyway, if I just think you're awesome, but I don't have any relationship with you, that could give me a swelled head, right? Is that maybe why so many of our superstars get in trouble? They get worship without substance, without a relationship, without a friend looking at them and saying, really? I think that God really doesn't necessarily want worship only, but they fell down and worshipped him anyway. So I want us to think about our powers as Christians. And so we're going to do a demonstration. Now this is from those 5,000 people plus all their relatives. We had 5 loaves, and technically you could count this as 10. And you had 2 fishes. Incidentally, it's weird. I hate touching sardines. But you would think, if there's a thing I could do. Everybody, this is what, we're going to pass this around, you guys handle it. There's 5 loaves, 2 fishes there. There's 16 with us, including me. I want you to see how far you get. I want to see how much is left when we're done. And if there is so much left that when the service is over, we decide not to go to fellowship because we're so full. We'll see. And also you have to remember, they didn't supersize stuff. There's, depending on who you read, the loaves were more like crackers. So this is Starkist, tuna, salad, and crackers. This is closer to what they had for 5,000 people, 5,000 men, plus women and children. I was generous in my portions to you, but do you think that those same portions, just said it somewhere, I'm not eating sardines, no way. You know, it was, hey, I put forks in there for you guys, it's hygienic. But in any case, what kind of power do we have? If we wanted to make the leftovers feed all of Matagorda County, we have that power when we don't shut our mind to it. We have the power to walk on water, to multiply food. So think about that. And then for those of you who are bold enough, I drove down to the bay today. And birds too can walk on water. It's like this shallow. Who wants to go after church? Who wants to see if we can walk on water? Hint, there are some oysters out there. So if you take a running start, you can kind of maybe step on the oysters, don't fall off, you'll hurt yourself. Could we walk on water? I think if it wasn't for us knowing in our hearts that we can't because we're not good enough, I think we could. So, knowing that nobody was going to follow me to the bank, 2.5 gallons of water. Who here wants to demonstrate that they can stand on non-moving water? We'll do this afterwards then. But you guys get my point. We're all afraid to do something that it clearly spells out in the history of Christianity we can do. We treat the history of our apostles as if it's a story, not history. Our history includes a fallible human, Peter, who I really believe we would recognize that he walked on water. For however limited a time, he pulled it off. We could do it too. And we can multiply this food, and we can do so much more when we remember this is our history. This is not simply a once upon a time story. So, the end of our story. After this part, Peter goes on, and if you look through Peter's life, you'll find in Acts 3:7 that he straightened this guy's feet and ankles. He raised people from the dead, Aeneas. He raised Tabitha from the dead. He talked to angels. He did a lot of stuff that we say we can't do. Why can't we? Where does it say we can't? Our history shows that we can. Once upon a time, we were focused on Christ, and we had his powers as his sidekicks. His sidekicks are called Christians, and he offered to share his power. Batman and Robin have an equal power. That's what he offered us. And yet, in our fear of getting out of the boat, we don't take him up on it. And so that is the story and history of our Christian faith. Amen. So, with that, please stand if you are able, and we will share in our affirmation of faith using the Apostles' Creed. I believe in God, the Father Almighty,
I